With Xilonen's kit being revealed, many are calling her the next Kazuha, but is she really? Well, let's break down her kit and see if she can truly replace them in your teams. I've decided to make this a two-part video because it'll just be way too long otherwise, with the second one focusing more in depth on the team she will slot in. Before diving into her abilities, here's a quick guide for building Xilonen. I know I should be doing this at the end, but perhaps you can get a rough idea of her kit by knowing what she wants beforehand. For a support build, prioritize defense and ER while adding crit rate for Favonius. For DPS, go to traditional defense sands, Geo or defense goblet, and a crit circlet. For this set, if you're gonna go support, you should be using the new hero set. While if you're going DPS Xilonen, you can either run the Obsidian Codex or the Husk of Opulent Dream set. Next is her weapon. Her signature is of course her best, which has a low base attack and grants a lot of defense. The passive basically gives Xilonen up to 20 defense and a crit buff based on her defense, up to 3.2 crit rate and 25.6 crit damage. The second passive gives a damage bonus to her team, also up to 25.6%. Though version 3 isn't out yet for another few days, it was leaked that the second buff now applies to herself, which did not beforehand. Speaking of the version 3 changes, there's also this, which I assume will be regarding her passive, which currently gives a 30% damage bonus, so it's a slight buff. I won't know for sure if this is true until a few days later, so take this with a grain of salt. For support, the first weapon is the obvious Favonius sword, which can help her battery her team. Just make sure you have a high enough crit rate because she sometimes can literally do a skill basic and leave the field. Next would be Freedom Sword. This is an interesting weapon which can buff her team and also strengthen her crystallized reaction. For DPS, you can basically use most of the 5-star stat sticks, with Chiori's sword being the best of the bunch if you can fulfill its conditions. Harbinger of Dawn is also a nice free-to-play option, but just don't use it with Arena. Lastly, we just have the 2 defense stat sticks, which can go on both sides. The new Natlan Craftable and the Cinnabar Spindle. This is early in her beta with it being version 2 as of me making this video, so what I'm about to say is subject to change. Xilonen is the new 5-star Geo sword unit who has similar damage amping capabilities to Kazuha. Unlike Kazu, who gives damage bonus from his kit and resistance shred from the artifact set, Xilonen is the complete opposite, where she gets res shred from her kit and damage bonus from the new hero set. Speaking of her kit, let's break it down. Starting with her skill, Xilonen will do a dash attack and go into her Night Soul state, where she will have 45 out of her 90 Night Soul points. Here, she gets on her roller skates and gains a Geo infusion to her basic attacks, which scale on her defense, lasting up to 9 seconds or until you swap off. The scaling is not much more than her attack scaling basics, so yeah. This has a cooldown of 7 seconds, which starts once she leaves her Night Soul state. When she's in this state, she gains 3 source samples which will all start as Geo and change based on your team's elements, being able to convert to Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo. If Xilonen maxes out her Night Soul meter, she'll shred the resistance of the element of her source samples by 36% at talent level 10. For reference, Vivi shreds for 40%. Looking at this chart and understanding the fact that most enemies have a 10% resistance, this means that Vivi generally has a 27% damage increase to your team. As such, Xilonen at talent level 10 will be giving our damage around a 25% damage increase. This is of course a lot, but the question is, how do we cap out her Night Soul points to get this shred? Well, let's look at her talent, which separates her 2 playstyles, that being support and a DPS focused one. The first playstyle focuses on support, shredding resistances and healing via burst. If Xilonen has at least 2 teammates and the required elemental types, her infused basic attacks will grant her 35 Night Soul points per hit. This means just while landing 2 basic attacks after her skill, you will instantly shred the respective resistances, though you will also lose her Geo infusion as she will eat all her Night Soul points when she activates the 3 source samples, which last for 15 seconds. According to HomDG Cat, the radius is equivalent to a Ganyu burst, which does follow you around. This is better than Kazu in a multi-wave situation, as the shred will persist on new enemies without requiring a swirl on them as well. You can mix and match elements as shown on the screen. For the Pyro, Hydro, and Electro case, this would also work, but there's no Geo shred cause it got overwritten. Just note, she cannot shred Geo off-field in a team where she did not convert at least 2 samplers. Sorry Ito mains. She does however shred Geo while she's on field, as a Geo sampler will always be active if she's in her Night Soul Blessing state. Next would be her Elemental Burst, which deals 1 instance of 506% of her defense at talent level 10. If she's converted at least 2 elements, she now gets healing via ult, which would heal based on the scaling as shown on the screen. This occurs for a total of 8 times with 1.5 second intervals, lasting 12 seconds. Giving her 3200 defense, which is what her weapon caps out at, she's healing around 7000 a tick for only the on-field character. This is also without a healing bonus circlet. Next would be her DPS playstyle, which occurs when she has not converted at least 2 teammate elements. As we can see from this passive, rather than getting 35 Night Soul points per basic, we instead just get a 30% damage bonus. Because we can't cap out her Night Soul points, we don't instantly lose our Night Soul state and our Geo infusion as well. Again, we have a 9-second DPS window at C0. This scaling isn't too spectacular and is similar to how Navia gains Geo infusion and some damage bonus as well, but unlike Navia, who has high bursts of damage via her skill, Xilonen doesn't really have that, so her on-field presence isn't that great. She does however now get the more offensive part of her ultimate, which if Xilonen did not convert at least 2 samples, there is now 2 additional Geo damage instances which each deal 506% of her defense. The total scaling now is 15-18%, which is slightly more than a fully amped up Navia skill. This is actually really high, but this one instance is just not enough. For both instances of the burst, it has an energy cost of 60 and a cooldown of 15, which is the same as the characters on screen. Version 2 did have this change though, but it just seemed to be a translation error. If this change did manage to go through though, Xilonen would have had a 5-second 12-stack YOLO nuke on standby for just 15 energy. This could have been stupidly broken for a DPS Xilonen, but oh well. I'll now just quickly go over her other talents. Reverse talent allows her to trigger a Night Soul burst once every 14 seconds if her Night Soul points is fully maxed out. But this also occurs when any not-link character deals elemental damage. Although these bursts don't deal any damage themselves, they can activate certain passives, such as the second part of this talent, which increases Xilonen's defense by 20% whenever a party member triggers a Night Soul burst. Her next talent grants your party a 15% move speed bonus for 10 seconds when you swap to Xilonen and Notlin, thanks to her Night Soul transmission mechanic. Next, I'll only go over her first 2 constellations. The first half of C1 extends her roller skate mode up to 45%, which is useful for exploration and a on-field Xilonen. This however doesn't benefit a support build, as she'll immediately lose her Night Soul state once her gauge is full. The nice part for support is the second half, which grants your team interruption resist when the source samples are activated, aka 15 seconds. The interruption resist is set at 0.5, which is the same as Hu Tao and Riesli's skill. If you stack multiple interruption resist, you simply just multiply the values, so 0.5 times 0.5 is equal to 0.25. For reference, 0.3 is what Xingqiu's Rain Swords has, and 0.15 is what Mulani's skill has, and 0 is no interruptions allowed. This constellation can be a nice alternative to Zhongli, where you trade comfort for Xilonen's damage amp, which I'll explain more later. Her C2 basically gives your allies debuffs on screen which match their respective element if the samples are all activated. For example, if you ran Xianling, Xingqiu, and Bennett and Xianling will get 40% attack, Xingqiu will get 40% HP, and Xilonen will get 30 crit rate. As you can see, it's not that good seeing how only Xianling is benefiting from this. Depending on the team, it can be pretty good, but overall it's just okay. This however can be pretty spicy for Electro characters who have a burst cooldown reduction of 5 seconds, which the only thing that does this currently is C6 Raiden, by the way. I can imagine a team like Yaimiko, Raiden, Sara, and Xilonen just all spamming ults, though I don't really know how good it'd be. I'll put in the description of someone else cooking though. Now to why she's OP. Most people keep comparing her to Kazuha due to their damage amp similarities, which is fair but not why she's OP in my eyes. It's actually because she replaces the sustain slot in many teams. Why is Bennett, Shanyu, and Chevru so OP in their respective teams compared to say Kokumi and Baizhu? It's because they amp up their team's damage in a way while also sustaining. This role compression is what allowed Bennett to remain meta since the release of the game. If Bennett had only healed or only damage amped, he'd just be good, but Hoyo messed up and he's been our Pyro Archon for 4 years now. If Hoyo wanted, they could just get rid of her healing and she'd move down from OP to like just really good. Let me explain this using this example. Say we had Nuvolette, Farina, Kazuha, and Baiju. If Nuvolette did 10 damage and Farina and Kazuha each amped his damage by 1.6 times and Baiju did literally nothing, Nuvolette's damage now goes to 25.6. Now, if we added another Kazuha-like support and replaced Baiju, now we got 10 times 1.6 times 1.6 times 1.6 and it becomes around 41. This is not how the math works in game by the way, but I just hope it gets the point across on how OP it is when your sustain is amping your damage as well. Kokomi, Baiju, and Zhongli are comfort picks, but if you want damage, we slot in Xilonen. Unfortunately, this will push Nuvolette to being the best DPS in the game as he can literally use the 3 best supports in the game, excluding Nahida. Wait, isn't he already the best DPS in the game? Yes, moving on. Now, she can also be a replacement for Kazuha in some teams, but not all of them as I'll get to in my next video. But essentially on teams where it may be difficult to swirl and trigger VV, teams whose reactions don't coexist such as Vape, Melt, Superconduct, Overload, and even Aggravate and Freeze, it can be an upgrade to Kazuha depending on the context. Yeah, the Freeze reaction's kinda weird. Sometimes Hydro and Cryo are both there and you get both swirls, other times there's only one, and sometimes you can swirl while they're frozen and you somehow get a Hydro swirl. Also, just imagine trying to swirl Electro while using a Nahida. It's not happening. Overall, she easily is within the top 4 strongest supports in the game, along with Kazuha, Farina, and Nahida. But just to finish off the video, let's just summarize how she is and then compare with Kazu. When it comes to support, she has a super fluid and quick rotation to support her team, literally staying on field for half a second if you don't ult. Her lack of heal time means more uptime for your DPS to do DPS things. This paired with her role compression makes her super similar to the function of Bennett for teams. She's either an easy upgrade for some teams like Nuvolette, or a potential side grade in others which I'll go over in my next video. When compared to Kazu, each clearly has their own strengths and weaknesses. While many are wanting to replace Kazuha, it's actually better to put them in the same team for many team types, with there only being a few where we'd actually want to just take out Kazuha. When looking at my chart, we can see they both have really similar res shred and damage bonuses. But where Xilonen shines is in multi-wave content, or if the DPS has long field time, and she also heals. The advantage to Kazuha is that he shines in AoE situations with his grouping, and he's really good in quick swap teams. Unfortunately, Kazuha can't heal, but he makes this up by dealing decent amount of damage. But TLDR, use Xilonen in teams that you don't need grouping or where Kazuha struggles to swirl. But if you need interruption resist, just go with Xilonen with her C1. And that's that. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. This is just part 1 of 2, and I'll try to release part 2 as soon as I can. After that, it will be about Shanli Yao, which I have all the materials pre-farmed for to compare with Calcharo. We're also almost at 1500 subscribers, which is dope as heck by the way. Besides that, put any questions or team ideas in the comments and I'll most likely check it out. Have a blessed day or night and